This is my true story. I worked my whole life so my son could live without struggle. I gave him everything: education, comfort, a home. I thought when I grew old I'd finally rest and be surrounded by love. But instead, one evening, while I sat in the kitchen waiting for him to speak, he looked at me coldly and said, "You're just a burden now." My world stopped. The air went silent. That moment changed everything. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I signed one paper, walked out of that house, and a week later, he collapsed. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now, and please subscribe so more people can hear stories like mine. He didn't yell when he said it. He didn't raise his voice or even look angry. That's what hurt the most. He just sighed, like he was tired of me, and said it as if it were a simple fact. "You're just a burden now." It wasn't the first time he had been distant, but it was the first time he said something I couldn't forget. I sat there for a few seconds, waiting for him to take it back, waiting for some sign that it was said in frustration or stress, but he didn't. He just stood up from the chair, picked up his phone, and walked away. The silence he left behind was heavy. I looked around the kitchen, the same one where I had cooked for him since he was a child, the same table where he used to do his homework. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. That sentence echoed in my head again and again, louder than any fight we ever had. I thought about all the nights I stayed up when he was sick, all the mornings I worked extra hours so he could have what other children had. I thought about how I gave up my own happiness to make sure his was secure, and now, the same boy I once held close was telling me I had become too much for him. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and wondered when exactly love had turned into tolerance, and when tolerance had turned into rejection. Maybe it started when I retired and no longer contributed to the bills. Maybe it started when I stopped cooking every day and started resting more. Maybe it was when he got married and thought his responsibility to me ended. I tried to remember the last time he called me Mom with warmth in his voice, but I couldn't. It had been replaced by sighs, eye rolls, and silence. I realized that night that I wasn't living in my home anymore. I was surviving in his. Every time I asked him about his day, he looked annoyed. Every time I offered help, he said I was interfering. Every time I tried to have a normal conversation, he found an excuse to leave the room. It wasn't one sentence that broke me. It was years of slow distance, built up until it finally had words. But that one sentence was the final weight that pushed me past the point of pain and into clarity. I sat up in bed before the sun came up and walked through every room of the house. I touched the walls I had painted, the curtains I had sewn, the couch I bought after my husband passed away. I realized everything in that home existed because I worked for it. It was never his gift to me. It was my gift to him. He was living off the stability I built, and he had the nerve to call me a burden. I didn't cry that morning. I made breakfast like usual, placed his cup of coffee on the table, and watched him rush out without even saying thank you. But something had changed in me. I no longer felt helpless. I no longer hoped for kindness. I decided that if he saw me as a burden, I would remove that burden from his life completely. That day, I pulled out every document, every file, every record with my name on it. I wanted to see how much of the life he claimed as ours was actually mine. I saw my name on the house deed, my signature on the bank papers, my pension covering most of the household expenses. Every proof reminded me that his comfort came from my labor. That knowledge gave me a strange kind of peace. I didn't need to argue or shout. I just needed to act. I didn't tell anyone about my decision. I went about my days as if nothing had happened, cooking, cleaning, smiling when needed. But inside, I was preparing. The sentence that broke me also freed me. I realized that he couldn't hurt me anymore because I had already lost him long before that night. The only thing left to lose was the illusion that he still cared. So, I made up my mind. The next time I signed my name, it wouldn't be for him. It would be for me. The house he called ours was never really ours. It was mine from the beginning. My name was the only one on the papers. Every brick, every wall, every piece of furniture had my sweat behind it. He moved in years later, after his marriage fell apart, saying it would only be for a few months. Months turned into years, and soon he started acting like the owner. He told people he was helping me by staying here. In truth, I was the one keeping him afloat. When my husband passed, I worked 3 jobs to keep the roof above our heads. I paid the mortgage alone. Every bill, every loan, every tax payment came from my account. I didn't complain because I loved my son. I thought one day he'd realize what I did for him and thank me, but instead, he started telling me what to do in my own home. He told me where to keep my things, what time to sleep, and how much electricity to use. The more comfortable he got, the less respect he showed. I remember the first time he said, "This is my house too." I didn't argue. I just smiled. Deep down, I knew he didn't even know how much he owed me. He thought because I was old, I forgot everything. But I never forgot a single payment. Every renovation was my decision. Every new piece of furniture was bought with my card. When the roof leaked, it was me who called the repairman. When the garden needed work, I was the one who paid. He just lived there using everything I had built without ever realizing it. Sometimes he'd invite his friends over and brag about his place. I would sit in the corner and listen, silent but burning inside. I'd watch him laugh like he earned it, like it was his hard work that made it possible, but I stayed quiet. I told myself that mothers forgive, that one day he would mature and see how much I had given, that one day he'd finally act like the son I raised. But that day never came. Instead, he became colder. When I got older and slower, he started treating me like I was in the way. He said things like, "You don't need to worry about this stuff anymore." He took over my mail, my phone calls, and my bank papers. At first, I thought he was helping me. Then I realized he was controlling everything. He made me sign papers without explaining what they were. He said it was just routine, just something the lawyer needed. I trusted him, like a fool. But later, I found out most of them were updates for joint accounts and shared ownership, things that gave him access to what I had earned. That night when he called me a burden, everything finally made sense. All the little things he did over the years weren't accidents. They were steps toward taking what was mine. But what he didn't know was that even with those changes, the foundation of that house was still legally under me. He couldn't erase my name. He couldn't take away what I worked for. That's when I realized I still had power. The next morning, I looked at the old files again. The property deed was still mine. The savings account was still in my control. My pension, my insurance, my will. Everything that truly mattered was untouched. I had been too quiet for too long, but now silence worked for me. He thought my calmness meant weakness. It didn't. It meant I was done fighting for his love. I was ready to protect my dignity instead. When he came home that evening, I made dinner like usual. He sat down, complained about his day, and didn't notice the way I looked at him. I realized that day that I didn't owe him anything anymore. Not money, not a roof, not comfort. I had already given enough. I had built the life he was standing on, and I could take it back whenever I wanted. The next morning started like any other. I woke up early, made his coffee, and placed it on the table, cream and 2 sugars, just the way he liked it. I didn't do it out of love anymore. It was habit. Years of being a mother had trained my hands even when my heart didn't want to move. He came downstairs, half awake, looking at his phone before he even looked at me. He sat at the table scrolling through messages while sipping the coffee I made. Not a single word of thanks. He asked what I planned to do that day. Before I could answer, he said I should start looking into assisted living. He said it casually, like it was nothing, like he was talking about groceries. I froze for a second, then smiled. "Maybe," I said softly. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his phone. He didn't notice that I was watching him closely, memorizing that moment. That was the last morning I made him breakfast. I looked at his face, the same face I once kissed goodnight when he was a child, and realized I didn't recognize it anymore. There was no warmth, no gratitude, no care, just coldness. The house had become quiet over time, but that silence now felt heavy. It wasn't peace, it was distance, the kind that grows when love runs out. After he left for work, I washed the dishes, wiped the counter, and sat at the table one last time. I stared at the empty chair where he had sat and told myself I was done. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain anything. I just needed to leave quietly. I changed my clothes, grabbed my handbag, and locked the door behind me. The air outside felt different. It was cool and clean, like freedom. I walked to the bus stop, holding my bag tight against my chest. I wasn't going shopping or visiting anyone. I was going to the lawyer's office, the same one I had visited with my husband decades ago when we first bought that house, the same one that helped us build our future. I was going back there to rebuild mine. The lawyer recognized me immediately. "It's been a long time," he said. I nodded and handed him the folder I'd been keeping hidden in my drawer for years. The documents had every detail: ownership papers, bank statements, tax records, and a letter I had written in case I ever needed to take control again. He read everything carefully, then looked at me and said, "You're the sole owner." He has no claim. I felt something inside me lift, like a heavy chain had finally broken. He asked if I wanted to make any changes. I said yes. I wanted everything transferred to a trust under my name only, something that couldn't be touched, not by him or anyone else. He began preparing the paperwork. As I signed each page, I felt my hands steady for the first time in months. Every stroke of the pen felt like I was reclaiming my life, piece by piece. When I was done, he handed me the final copy and smiled. "You're free," he said. I smiled back, but I didn't cry. I had no tears left. I walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in years. The streets looked brighter. The noise didn't bother me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. When I got home later that day, he wasn't back yet. I looked around the house, my house, and took a deep breath. It felt different now, not because it changed, but because I had. I packed a small bag that night, just a few clothes and important papers. I didn't leave a note. I didn't owe him that. I locked the door behind me and didn't look back. That breakfast had been my last act of kindness to him. Everything after that moment belonged to me. My peace, my dignity, my future. It was just one paper, but it carried my entire life on it. I sat in the lawyer's office again the next morning, calm, steady, and certain. The smell of ink and paper filled the room. The lawyer read every line aloud, making sure I understood. I nodded each time, my eyes fixed on the last page, the one that needed my signature. I picked up the pen slowly, almost like I was holding a weapon I had forgotten I owned. Then I signed my name. One clear line, my name, not his. The ownership transfer was done. The house, the savings, the land, all moved to the trust I created under my name alone. I felt the weight leave my chest as soon as the ink dried. He had no idea. He thought joint ownership made him safe. He thought he could do what he wanted, say what he wanted, and still have a home waiting for him. But that morning, everything changed. Every utility, every bill, every document was redirected to the trust. Even his name on the secondary account meant nothing now. I had taken back control in silence. I didn't argue. I didn't warn him. I just erased his power legally, quietly, and completely. As I walked out of the office, the sun hit my face, and I smiled for the first time in months. Freedom didn't come with noise. It came with paperwork. It was strange how peace could be sealed with a stamp and a signature. I stopped by a small cafe on the way home and had tea alone. No one around me knew what I had just done, and that made it even more peaceful. For the first time, I wasn't the weak one. I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the woman who just took her life back. When I returned home, he was sitting in the living room watching TV. He didn't even notice I had been gone all day. He asked if I could make dinner, and I said yes. He didn't see the small folder in my hand. I placed it in my drawer and smiled to myself. I cooked like usual, talked like usual, and went to bed like usual. But everything had changed. The house no longer belonged to him. It was legally mine, untouchable. That night I couldn't sleep, not because I was worried, but because I was finally free from the fear that had followed me for years. I thought about how easy it was for him to call me a burden. I wondered what he would say if he knew the truth, that the burden he looked down on had just removed him from everything he thought he owned. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. The next few days went by quietly. He still acted like the man of the house. He complained about the electricity bill, told me to stop leaving the lights on, told me to manage my space better. I just nodded, watching him talk without knowing he was standing in a home that no longer had his name on it. Every time he opened the fridge or turned on the TV, I felt no anger anymore, only calm, because now it was all mine, legally, permanently, and peacefully. The lawyer called me a few days later to confirm everything was processed. "It's official," he said. "Everything is in your name. No one can touch it." I thanked him quietly and hung up. I looked around the house again and smiled. I didn't feel trapped anymore. I didn't feel small or unwanted. I felt strong. The same house that once felt heavy now felt light. I packed another small bag that evening, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I didn't need to live there anymore. I had already taken what mattered: my rights, my name, my peace. I didn't leave out of anger. I left because I had finally signed the paper that gave me my freedom back. The next week felt strangely calm. He didn't notice a thing. I acted like everything was normal because pretending was easier than explaining. Every morning I made tea, watered the plants, and smiled when he walked by. He thought the silence meant peace. It wasn't peace. It was distance. I had already left that house in my heart. I spent most of the week packing slowly. Not enough for him to notice, just a few clothes at a time, some photos, and a few personal papers. I hid them inside a small suitcase under my bed. Each time I zipped it closed, it felt like I was closing a door on the life that had already ended. He called me twice during that week from work, not to ask how I was doing, but to tell me what to do. Small things like paying a bill or cleaning something before guests arrived. I said yes to everything. My voice stayed calm, polite, and careful. I didn't argue or remind him that I didn't owe him anything anymore. I didn't need to. The papers already spoke for me. At night, I sat by the window and watched the lights outside. I didn't cry. I just thought about how strange life could be. The same son I raised with love and sacrifice was now the man I had to protect myself from. It wasn't hate I felt. It was disappointment. A deep, quiet kind that doesn't fade with time. I had given him everything, and still, it wasn't enough. By the third day, he started to sense something was different. He asked why I was so quiet. I smiled and said I was just tired. He believed it. He didn't look too closely. He never really did. He thought I was just an old woman who couldn't live without him. He had no idea that I was already free, that I had already made sure he couldn't hurt me again. I stopped answering his questions about money. I told him I was handling it. He didn't care as long as the light stayed on and the fridge stayed full. He didn't know the bills were no longer in his name. He didn't know that the account he thought we shared was now frozen to him. I had moved everything to my trust and my private account. Every detail was done quietly, every change hidden in plain sight. On the fourth night, I stayed up late at my friend's house by the coast. She didn't ask questions. She just gave me tea and told me to rest. Her small home faced the sea, and the sound of waves made me feel alive again. My phone kept buzzing on the table, his name flashing again and again, but I didn't answer. Each missed call felt like freedom. He must have been confused at first, maybe even worried. But worry turns to panic when people lose control. I knew it would happen. I knew one day soon he would realize what I had done. But I wasn't scared. For years, I lived under his words, his moods, his rules. Now, I lived under nothing. Just the sound of the ocean and the quiet of my own thoughts. On the fifth day, I turned off my phone completely. No more noise, no more guilt. I walked along the coast, feeling the salt air on my face, and I thought about my life, how hard I had worked, how many times I chose love over myself. This time I chose differently. I chose peace. That week taught me something. You don't have to fight people who betray you. You just have to stop giving them the power to hurt you. Silence, distance, and one signature can do what years of arguments never could. Exactly 7 days later, it happened. He found the envelope on his doorstep. It was thick, official, and stamped in red. I wasn't there to see it, but the lawyer later told me how it went. The letter was clear and direct: eviction by primary owner. There was no emotion, no argument, just law. Every word on that paper carried my name and my right. It didn't scream or threaten. It simply ended everything. He opened it in the middle of the afternoon. The neighbors saw him standing there, reading it once, twice, and then a third time, like his mind couldn't accept what his eyes were seeing. They said he went pale, then sat down on the front steps with the letter in his hands. He didn't move for almost an hour. He looked lost, like a man who suddenly realized the roof above his head wasn't his anymore, because it wasn't. That house, the one he called his, no longer belonged to him in any way. Every right he thought he had vanished with that notice. His name was gone from everything. The locks, the bills, the insurance, even the mailbox, all in mine. For years he told me what to do under that roof. Now he had no right to even stand under it. He called me again and again that day. I didn't answer. My phone stayed silent on purpose. I wanted him to feel that same silence he gave me all those years when I spoke, and he didn't listen. That same emptiness I felt every time he ignored my words or dismissed my presence. Silence can be the loudest sound when it's all you have left. The lawyer told me he came to the office the next day, furious and panicking. He said my son demanded answers, said there must have been a mistake, but there wasn't. The lawyer showed him the papers, my signature, the legal transfers, the trust documents, everything. He was told in plain terms that he had no ownership, no claim, and no authority. My son reportedly went quiet. The lawyer said he just stared at the papers for a long time, breathing heavily before walking out. I imagined that moment in my mind, the way he must have felt seeing everything slip away. It wasn't joy I felt, it was release. I didn't want him homeless. I just wanted him to understand what it felt like to lose something that mattered because of pride. For years he made me feel small in my own house. Now he knew what that felt like. That evening, he drove to my friend's house. He must have looked desperate because even she said she pitied him for a second. He knocked on her door asking for me, holding the letter like a broken promise. I didn't rush to meet him. I took my time. I opened the door and stood there quietly. He looked at me, eyes red and tired, holding that envelope like it was a wound. "You can't do this," he said. I stayed calm and said, "I already did." He stared at me in disbelief. For the first time, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't weak. I was the one in control. He asked me why I would do such a thing. I didn't argue or explain. I just reminded him of what he said to me, that I was a burden. I told him I had simply taken his words seriously. If I was a burden, then I had removed myself. He didn't know what to say. He stood there for a while, his mouth open, but no words came out. I could see the realization in his eyes, that he had pushed too far, that love has limits, and that respect once lost doesn't return. He looked at the paper again, then at me, then left without another word. I watched him walk away, slow and heavy, and I felt nothing but calm. I didn't hate him. I just didn't care anymore. The notice had done what my words never could. It made him listen. He came back the next morning. I knew he would. The look on his face said everything before he even opened his mouth. He wasn't angry this time. He was scared. His pride had finally broken. He stood outside my friend's small house, holding that same paper in his hand, creased and wrinkled from how tightly he had been gripping it. When I opened the door, he didn't walk in right away. He stood there, staring at me like he was looking at someone he didn't recognize. For years, he had seen me as weak. Now he saw something different, a woman who didn't need him anymore. He started talking fast. He said it wasn't fair. He said he didn't mean what he said that night. He said he was stressed, that I took it the wrong way, that he was sorry. His voice shook, not because of guilt, but because he finally realized what losing me actually meant. I listened quietly, just watching him. I didn't interrupt. I didn't raise my voice. When he finished, I said only one thing. "You said I was a burden." "I believed you." His face fell. He looked like someone who had just been punched without warning. He tried again, saying he didn't mean it, that he was only tired that day. I told him tired people rest. Cruel people speak the truth when they're comfortable. And he had been comfortable. He had lived off me for years, used my roof, my money, my silence. He thought I would never fight back. But that day, I wasn't his mother who kept forgiving. I was the woman who finally remembered her worth. He followed me inside, still holding the paper, looking around the small living room like he couldn't understand how I had gone from that big house to this quiet place. But what he didn't know was that I liked this peace more than any big home. I didn't need space filled with resentment. I needed air that didn't carry tension. I sat down, poured myself a cup of tea, and offered him some. He refused. He was too shaken to sit. He just stood there, staring at the floor, trying to find words. Finally, he said, "You can't just walk away from family." I looked at him and said, "Family doesn't throw you away first." He looked down again, speechless. He wanted to blame me, but deep down, he knew the truth. He built this moment himself. Every ignored call, every cold word, every time he made me feel small, it all led here. He asked me if I hated him. I said no. Hate takes energy, and I had spent enough of mine already. I told him I just didn't want to live where I wasn't respected. I told him I wasn't angry. I was done. He sat down then, his hands shaking, his eyes wet. He said he never thought I'd actually leave. That was the problem. He never thought I could. He underestimated the quiet strength that years of struggle gave me. We sat in silence for a while. The clock ticked softly on the wall. He finally asked if I'd come back home. I said, "That house isn't home anymore. It's just walls and memories I've already let go of." He looked like he wanted to argue but didn't. He knew it was over. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was coming in through the curtains. I told him it wasn't about revenge. It was about peace. I said I forgave him, but forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means moving on. I told him he had a choice now. Learn from it or stay bitter. The rest was up to him. He didn't say anything else. He stood up slowly, folded the notice back into his pocket, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned around and said, "I didn't think you'd ever stop needing me." I smiled and said, "I didn't either. Until you made me." He nodded once and left. I watched him walk down the path, his shoulders low, his steps slow. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. But I didn't feel powerful or proud. I just felt free. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from winning. It comes from walking away. The house went up for sale the next morning. I didn't hesitate. The lawyer handled everything, and within days the process began. I didn't even visit it again. There was no need. That place wasn't my home anymore. It was just a building filled with echoes of what used to be love. The new owners came, the papers were signed, and every dollar from the sale went straight into a retirement foundation under my name. It was simple, clean, and final. I didn't tell him. He found out on his own when the real estate sign went up. By then, it was too late. His voice on the phone that day was a mix of disbelief and panic, but I didn't pick up. I didn't owe him an explanation. I had already given too much of myself explaining things to someone who never listened. He moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't what he was used to. No big living room, no garden, no extra rooms to fill with pride. Just a small space with white walls and silence. For the first time, he had to pay every bill himself, and I heard from a neighbor that he struggled. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I wasn't cruel. I didn't wish him pain. I just wanted him to live a life that matched his choices. The comfort he lost wasn't mine to restore. I didn't send him hate or anger. I sent him something better, a copy of the receipt for my new home by the sea. A simple note was attached. It said, "I hope you find peace, just like I did." That was it. No lectures, no guilt, just truth. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for rest. For years, I carried guilt that didn't belong to me. I thought being a good mother meant sacrificing everything, even my dignity. I learned too late that love without respect is just a slow kind of pain. In my new home, I learned the beauty of quiet mornings. I woke up to the sound of waves instead of raised voices. I drank coffee on my porch without waiting for anyone to join me. I watched the sun rise, not out of habit, but because I finally had time to notice it. It was strange at first, the emptiness, the stillness, but soon it felt peaceful. I realized I didn't miss him. I missed the version of him that once loved me. The boy who used to hold my hand at the market, who used to hug me after school, who once promised he'd take care of me when I got old. That boy was gone a long time ago. What remained was a man who forgot where he came from. Sometimes I thought about how things could have been different, if he had just said sorry sooner, if he had just shown a little kindness. But life doesn't work on ifs, it works on choices. He made his, and I made mine. I used to think age made me weak. I was wrong. Age gave me patience, clarity, and strength to do what I couldn't have done years ago. Walk away without looking back. A few weeks later, he sent a message through a friend. It said he was sorry and that he missed me. I didn't reply. Some things don't need answers. Some lessons are learned only when the silence becomes too heavy to ignore. I knew he was learning that lesson now, not through anger, but through absence, through realizing that people who love you will always stay until you make them feel like they shouldn't. I looked at the papers again one evening, the sale documents, the bank receipts, the trust records, and smiled. They weren't just proof of ownership. They were proof of survival. Every page was a reminder that I didn't let life break me, even when it tried. Peace doesn't come from holding on. It comes from letting go, quietly, completely, and without regret. That was my lesson. He came to see me months later. I saw his car pull up outside my little seaside home. For a moment, I thought about pretending not to be there, but I didn't. I opened the door before he could knock twice. He looked different, thinner, slower, older. The arrogance that once filled his face was gone. His eyes were tired, red around the edges, like he hadn't slept much. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, holding a small box of pastries, the kind I used to buy him when he was a boy. "I didn't mean it," he said finally, his voice breaking halfway through. "I didn't mean what I said that day." I looked at him and nodded. I believed him, in a way. But belief doesn't undo damage. Some words stay longer than people think. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the small wooden table by the window. I poured him tea without asking, just like I used to. We sat in silence for a while. The waves outside filled the room with a soft, steady sound. It wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, like time had slowed down just enough for both of us to breathe. He started talking about his job, his small apartment, how quiet it felt without anyone around. He said he missed the smell of home-cooked meals, the sound of laughter, even my nagging. I listened without interrupting. I didn't say much. I just watched him. The boy I raised was still somewhere inside him, buried under years of pride and ego. I could see it now, the regret, the pain, the realization that time doesn't wait for anyone to fix their mistakes. When he apologized again, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just said, "I know." Because I did. I knew he was sorry, but I also knew I couldn't go back. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about accepting that some things can never be the same again. I wasn't angry anymore. I just didn't have the space in my heart to rebuild what he destroyed. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be remembered. And he asked if he could visit sometimes. I said yes, but not often. He nodded slowly, understanding what I meant. It wasn't punishment. It was boundaries. For the first time, he respected them. He finished his tea quietly, stood up, and hugged me. It was a different kind of hug, softer, uncertain, and filled with guilt. I didn't hug him back at first. Then I did, not for him, but for myself. Because even after everything, I didn't want bitterness to live in me. After he left, I stood by the window watching him drive away. I thought about how life has a way of teaching lessons that words can't. I didn't need revenge to make things right. I just needed peace, and I had it now. The silence in my house wasn't lonely anymore. It was gentle, the kind that comes when you've finally stopped fighting battles that never end. I walked to the porch and looked at the sea. The wind was strong that day, but it felt good on my face. The horizon looked endless, calm, and alive. I realized I wasn't angry and I wasn't broken. I was free. I had spent years trying to be loved the way I gave love, but sometimes life teaches you that peace is better than attention and dignity is worth more than comfort. He still calls once in a while. His voice is softer now. He asks how I am, if I need anything. I always say I'm fine, because I am. I don't tell him about the long walks by the shore, the quiet mornings with tea, or the small joy of living without fear. Those are mine now. He doesn't need to know everything anymore. He only needs to know that I'm okay. Forgiveness can sound like small talk when done right. You don't have to shout to show someone they hurt you. Sometimes you just have to live well enough that they see what they lost. That's all the closure I ever needed. He once called me a burden, and those words used to echo in my mind every night. But now, as I sit by the window of my small seaside home, I realize something. I was never the burden. I was the backbone, I was the one who kept the lights on, who held things together, who sacrificed so he could stand tall. I wasn't a weight he carried. I was the ground he walked on. And when he forgot that, I stepped aside and let him learn how to walk on his own. The notice on his door wasn't revenge. It was truth written in ink. It was the moment the balance was restored. Sometimes I think about that day when he found the letter, the way he must have felt his world crumble in one silent moment. I don't smile at that memory. I don't celebrate it. I just understand it. Some lessons have to be learned through loss, because kindness alone doesn't reach those who take it for granted. He thought he could talk to me any way he wanted, live off me, disrespect me, and still have me waiting when he needed comfort. But even mothers have limits. Even love has a line. Mine was crossed that day when he looked me in the eye and said I was a burden. Now my days are quiet, but they're not empty. I wake up with purpose, not pressure. I go for walks by the sea, feed the birds that visit my porch, and talk to neighbors who actually listen. I read books again, something I hadn't done in years. I write letters to myself sometimes, not to anyone else, just reminders that I survived what was meant to break me. Age didn't make me helpless. It made me wise. It made me careful with my time, my heart, and my ink. He calls once a month now. The first few times I didn't answer. I needed space, not more words. But now, sometimes I pick up. We talk about small things, the weather, his work, nothing deep. I can hear the hesitation in his voice, the guilt that lingers between every pause. He asks if I'm okay, and I always say yes. And I am. He doesn't need to know that I sleep better than ever, that I eat when I want, and that I no longer wake up to the sound of someone calling my name only to give me orders. He doesn't need to know that the quiet he feared is the peace I prayed for. I don't hold anger in my heart anymore. Anger keeps you tied to the past. I let it go the moment I walked out of that house. What I hold now is freedom, a kind of freedom that doesn't come from running away, but from finally standing firm. I don't wish him pain. I wish him clarity. I hope one day he truly understands what he lost. Not the house, not the comfort, but the person who loved him the most. Sometimes I think about the last thing he said to me before he left that day. I didn't think you'd ever stop needing me. I smiled then, but now I understand what that meant. He wasn't used to seeing me strong. He wasn't used to seeing me choose myself. That's what shocked him more than the notice, more than losing the house. It was realizing that the woman he thought was weak had finally outgrown her fear. The sound of the sea outside my window reminds me that life always moves forward. The waves come and go, but they never stop. I'm the same way now. I don't look back. I don't wait for apologies or chances that never come. I just live. Every morning I open my window, breathe in the salt air, and thank God that I found peace before it was too late. Nah! He thought he ended something when he called me a burden. But that was the day I began again. And when he found the notice on his door and collapsed, it wasn't from shock. It was from realization. He finally saw the truth. The burden was never me. It was his pride. And when I signed that paper, I didn't destroy him. I simply set myself free.